The particular peptide I thought we would talk about today is called Tesamorelin. It's definitely one that we use in my practice. And there's obviously different ways to use it.
It sounds like people need to understand how these systems operate before they start manipulating them, hence probably why a good medical provider should be involved in that. Welcome back to Beyond the Pump. And today in our provider science segment, we have, again, Dr. Trevor Turner here at Provita Health, his lovely, beautiful clinic. He's agreed to spend some knowledge for us on peptides because this is such a prevalent issue. And when I say issue, I'm referring to the idea of there's a lot of consumers that are starting to get hip to this stuff. They're starting to look for these things. They're asking their medical providers. They're asking their personal trainers, hey, should I do this? They're asking ChatGPT. And so we actually have a real life ChatGPT here that, again, great, phenomenal story background in terms of research and application, which I think is such a rare incredible gem when it relates to medical practice. So thanks for being here today, Dr. Turner. And I think you have a very particular peptide that you would like to dive into and help educate our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're going to go back to that paper that we mentioned in the last segment. So the name of this review article is Therapeutic Peptides in Orthopedics, Applications, Challenges, and Future Directions. It breaks them down into kind of four broad categories. And the category I figured we would start with, very germane to orthopedics, is in this table 2, muscle and cartilage repair, therapeutic peptides and molecular pathways. And these particular pathways that they're referencing relate to what we call GHRHs, which stands for Growth Hormone Releasing Hormones. And so the particular peptide I thought we would talk about today is called Tesamorelin. It's definitely one that we use in my practice. And there's obviously different ways to use it, whether you're working with a professional athlete population, which, by the way, these are on the WADA list. So you want to be very clear, like if you're working with a professional athlete who's being drug tested, you don't want to give them or prescribe them something that would potentially be flagged and ruin their ability to participate in competition. Then, the other context that we often look at are, am I recovering from something? So am I injured or am I post-procedure? And therefore, do I need to augment or help recovery? And then there's the population that's like, okay, well, maybe I'm a master's athlete or I'm over 50 or 60 and I know that I lose certain kinds of pulsatile growth hormone release over time. And I want to be able to recover better, or maybe improve fat oxidation, and I want to be, quote, healthier or higher performing, right? And so I think we tend to see probably those two populations the most as it pertains to this. There are certainly other GHRHs on the market besides Tesamorelin. So a lot of people on this podcast probably will have heard of CJC1295 with ipamorelin. They may have heard of AOD 9604. And there's more examples than just that.
Yeah, for sure. So before we kind of dive into the particulars on this one, I would hazard a guess that majority of our audience have maybe minimal formal education in some of these domains. So just to, be explicitly clear, like GHRH, can you maybe explain the purpose of what that is and how that fits in with someone's biology?
Yeah. So let's think about so humans, we're born, we grow. There is a way to do like a diagnostic test for someone that does not make growth hormone called a stimulation test. And it's an expensive test and it's not available in every single clinic or location. And that's mostly used in the context of like, I'm a congenital kid with a deficiency and short stature, and I need to figure out if you're making it or not, right? Then there is the notion of, okay, well, we can either give you exogenous growth hormone, like you'd be injecting growth hormone itself, or we can give you something that sort of turns on your machinery and enables you to produce endogenous growth hormone. And so the difference between those, that's probably we should discern between, is that when you get a release of this hormone, you have somatotropes, which are cells in the anterior pituitary that release this hormone. And then you also have a break, basically, which is like a negative feedback loop that is caused by a molecule called somatostatin. So if you inject exogenous growth hormone, basically you're just overwhelming sort of that negative feedback loop. And that loop exists for a reason, right? And we know that, super physiologic, or basically levels that are over what humans would naturally release, can be dangerous and can cause adverse effects for people. Probably the one most people are worried about long-term is related to, potential tumor growth, right? But there's other ones, just like, swelling in your joints and carpal tunnel syndrome and problems with, like more just nuisances, let's say, right?
Yeah.
When you use a peptide like a GHRH, that tells your machinery that's already there to turn itself on. And so that negative feedback loop still exists and stays intact. So a lot of people would say, well, wow, it feels sort of unnatural to inject something exogenous, but if I can get my own body to make it, then that is either safer or it just feels like more kind of, like a reasonable approach because I may not have as many side effects or downstream effects from that.
Got it. And so that's where something like Tesamorelin here would be a way to circumnavigate that or to jumpstart that process or act as a stopgap? Like maybe how does the mechanism specifically?
So when we think about peptides, so we talked about, peptides are these groups of amino acids that are bonded together by a peptide bond. Tesamorelin is a 44 sequence peptide. It is not exactly,
what does that mean?
It means there's 44 amino acids that are put together to make it.
Got it.
And it is synthetic, so it's not the exact same thing as endogenous growth hormone, but it does stimulate those cells in the pituitary to produce it. Right now, where Tesamorelin has really been studied the most is it was commercialized as a pharmaceutical, and that name of that is called Egrifta, and it was used in the HIV population. And so a lot of people are like, well, that's weird. If I don't have HIV, why would I take that, right? But you see certain kinds of problems in the HIV population, meaning lipodystrophy being a big one. So the fact that now your fat deposition is sort of unnatural and it's put into different places in the body that may be unusual, or it may result in greater inflammation and another problem with lipids or the deposition of what we see like with cholesterol molecules on the inside of vessels. So when I'm thinking about peptides, I always like to say, well, how much human evidence and data is there?
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, if it's used in this population, maybe, the majority of patients who come in our clinic don't have HIV, but a lot of people have fat deposition, which could be dangerous, or have deposition of lipid molecules inside their vessels, which may be adverse for cardiac health.
Okay.
So should we think about the underlying mechanism more?
Got
right?
it.
And the underlying mechanism is improvement of something we call beta-oxidation, right? So not to make people go like, oh God, we're going back to the Krebs cycle again, right? But we think about how we release energy and how we create ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is that energy currency of the cell. You look at something like glycolysis or fermentation, you only produce a couple ATP. You look at the electron transport chain, you get 36 ATP. You look at beta oxidation, and it depends on obviously what molecule you're breaking down, but 16 carbon fatty acid would produce like over 100 ATP, right? So from an energy standpoint, beta oxidation is very efficient. We tend to lose that, especially as we age, or we can have a lot of different things that affect metabolic flexibility. But so if we can enhance beta oxidation, most of the time we see improved way that you metabolize fat, and especially if you have visceral adipose. So one of the reasons I really like Tesamorelin is we do DEXA scans on everyone who comes in the clinic. So we get a feeling not just of their muscle and bone density, but we also get markers of adipose and then visceral adipose, the fat that surrounds organs. And that fat has been shown to be very dangerous. It's almost like secreting just inflammatory cytokines all the time. So if I can use a molecule in someone who it's safe to use it with, that will preferentially reduce visceral adipose, most of the time I'm going to get lower inflammatory response for that person and enhance safety as time goes on.
Got it. Okay, so let me just tie this down here to make sense of it. And by the way, for our audience, I deliberately come into these not researched, and I know very little about peptides, so you guys are getting a real stream of consciousness as we kind of talk about this stuff. But when we think about this, so it stimulates some growth hormone releasing stuff that, the contraindications might be that it may have some kind of atherosclerotic side effects. Is that?
We actually see improvements.
Improvements. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and the reason I would say that is, number one, obviously it was shown in the HIV population that it does improve lipid metabolism and deposition. And the other thing is we do, besides DEXA, there's another kind of scan we use. It's an ultrasound that you do of the carotids. Now it's called a CIMT. And we're literally measuring the amount of plaque or deposition that are happening inside the carotids. We also draw some lab work. So we look
Sure.
at HDL and we look at triglycerides and things like that. And we see those things get better as well. So I think, in the person, let's say we got two people.
Yep.
One person comes in with a DEXA. They've got great muscle, but they're fluffy. They've got more fat than they need. And they want to try to figure out how to lean out. Maybe more likely to talk to that person about a GLP-1. In the person who comes in and they don't have optimal body composition, but their muscle is really low, I'd rather not give that person a GLP-1, but we might talk to them about whether or not Tesamorelin or another growth hormone analog would be appropriate, or depending on the amount of visceral adipose they have. So different decisions get made with different data. I think, we would basically draw a hard line for anybody who's actively being treated for cancer. Obviously, we draw a hard line for somebody who has an allergy to the drug or whatever.
How would you know that before you took it?
We would ask them.
Okay.
Yeah, we would ask them. And then, the other thing is the dosing that we use is different, right? So the dose that people got, or the dose that they use with Egrifta is 2 milligrams, right? And the dosing that we use is much smaller than that typically. And then you have some flexibility in terms of how many times you would dose it in a day, right?
A day?
How many times a day?
They're sitting there to damn.
Correct.
Not like a week. Ooh.
Right. So there are some people who you'll talk to about this and they'll be like, dude, I'm not giving myself a shot every day. And then you'll get other people who are like, yeah, I don't care. It's a tiny needle. And if this gets me past the thing I've been struggling with, and by the way, my skin looks better and my joints hurt less and I recover better and my deep sleep is improved and my lipid markers are going down, they're like, great. And they would rather do that than take a statin or something else. I don't know. It depends on the person.
You got to pick. You some trade-offs here.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like administration-wise. Now, just to be very clear and to outline this specifically for our audience, it sounds like there's some indicated uses, and there's some contraindicated people for that. Can you specifically outline who should probably not take this? You said obviously cancer people, you mentioned someone that may have higher amounts of muscle tissue. Maybe you can outline that more specifically.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say muscle tissue is a contraindication, but there is a marker you can measure called IGF-1.
Okay.
And IGF-1 is a simple blood draw. It's a very cheap test to get. We get it on everybody who comes in our clinic here. But if you use Tesamorelin, it can produce increases in IGF-1. Not all of the GHRHs do that. So AOD 9604 does not do that, for example. But if you flip somebody into super physiologic, then they're going to have side effects and they're not going to like it, right?
Got it.
So kind of swollen joints being a classic one, and they'll complain of pain if that happens. Carpal tunnel is a common one. And it's funny because, when you know the side effects, you're sort of like looking for them. And I definitely think there's like a physician, they're like, oh God, they're like, well, if I tell everybody all the side effects, like they're going to call my clinic next week and tell me they have them. Right?
Yeah.
But I do think, for us, we just give everybody an educational document when we start. And we say, listen, like these are the signs that you're high. And we already know your IGF-1 before we start. So if you start to have any symptoms, of course, we can draw another lab test, or we can stop the medicine, or we can change a dose, right? But so you always want it's like, with hormone replacement, like we don't give people massive doses of anabolic testosterone, but we give them the amount that restores them to the upper limit of normal human physiology, right? And that's, I think, how we should be thinking about peptides as well. And should be thinking about probably more than one effect instead of just, well, I use this because I want to lean out. It's great to lean out. That's cool. But it's also important to think about the context of lipid metabolism and cell signaling and PPAR gamma. And, there's a lot of biochemical pathways that happen inside the cell. And not all of those things are easily measured because these metabolites have very quick half-lives sometimes. So you want to always be thoughtful about what are the things I can measure and what are the things that I can't.
Got it. So, it definitely sounds like people need to understand how these systems operate before they start manipulating them, hence probably why a good medical provider should be involved in that. And I'm looking at the side eye in the camera simply for the fact that there's an increased, rise in people that are selling short 2-hour peptide courses that, allow people to procure these things for their patients or their clients, as trainers and coaches. And so we just really want to equip people with the appropriate information on how to, be an informed coordinator of care, so to speak, with a good medical team, with an allied health professional. We generally suggest most coaches should have a physician that they refer to, that they trust, that knows that, that they know they will take care of their clients, which is why, again, we strongly refer people to, Provita Health here in Atlanta. But I think to kind of bring all this to a close here, this particular peptide, good for people that are trying to potentially manage some overfat states, contraindicated for people that may have maybe some insulin resistance, maybe people that are pre-diabetic. I mean, is there a threshold for that pre-diabetic state, or is that not really, you just kind of talk to a provider?
Yeah, I mean, depends on the patient, right?
Okay.
Because most people are, don't have one problem. Mm-hmm. And so it needs to be taken in context of the other things you're doing to manage. And we use CGMs, for example, a lot, continuous glucose monitors, for a lot of people that we're looking at how they respond to glucose and insulin with the things that they eat. Mm-hmm. And so, that might be a conversation for somebody who's pre-diabetic and really close to maybe flipping into full-on diabetes. Mm-hmm. But that would be another consideration with the other data you take from DEXA and whatever else you use. So.
Got it. Yeah. So definitely want to get assessed prior to just ripping through some needles, because I think that there are a lot of trainers out there and people that, frankly, they just don't know any better. And so this is intended to combat that ignorance a little bit. But, there's a lot of side effects to different things. And obviously that highly depends on the individual, which is where, what those peptide courses may not tell you are, the way I envision it is kind of like those commercials where they're selling a drug and they're like, hey, this is Retrexa and it's going to, by the way, make your boner fall off. And
Green
you're like,
butterfly.
Exactly. Yeah. You're going to see some hallucinations and your guts are going to implode and you're going to have some cavitation, like just some random shit. But, those aren't the things that they talk about. And so I think, obviously understanding how things work so that way you can understand how they're broken and then you can kind of bridge that gap a little bit. I think that that's really, really a great place for people to start. And so if people wanted to learn more about peptides or I guess the biological systems that they might want to start knocking down in an A&P course, where would be a good place for them to start to grasp some of the mechanistic items that this influences and impacts?
There's definitely a few different, I think, people kind of leading the charge for education. I mean, for me, where I started was with the SEED Scientific Research and Performance Institute. That was an easy jump for me because their founder's an orthopedic surgeon. And so I was already in the sports medicine field. And I was like, oh, great, somebody who speaks some of the same language. But then I showed up and I realized the language was pretty much cellular biology. So it's you don't need to be a sports medicine person to read about those things and think about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think there's other people with courses like A4M and, these courses are expensive. So you get some people say, well, wow, are you really going to spend the money to do that? And then there's a couple people with some books, and some of those people have experience, with treating patients, and some of those people have experience treating themselves. Which is, important, right? But it's hard sometimes to draw conclusions from how one individual responds to how everyone in the population is going to respond. Yeah. And that's where sometimes, usually working with somebody who's had experience doing lots and lots of treatments over a high volume of patients, you get better at the things that you see a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important risk management strategy for people that, may be looking to go down some of these modalities is you can find the street bro and, he might sell you some steroids or something in the basement of LA Fitness. And I've seen that more than my fair share of times. Sure. You see people penning in public and it just kind of gets weird. But I think that it is important to understand that what works for one person does not work for everyone else. And that margin of error is where a lawsuit exists or where, a lot of serious health complications might arise that, if you are an unqualified individual just doing this because, you're using it for the one label use or you're using this particular peptide to, help someone lose some body fat because you're a coach and you think results matter to the degree that you're willing to sacrifice or maybe risk their safety. Everybody just needs to slow down for a second and, again, partner with someone great. So any closing thoughts as we wrap up here on this episode, down and dirty, on the peptide situation in the series here?
I think what we'd like to do next time is maybe talk about a peptide that might be very synergistic with
Sure.
Tesamorelin. And so maybe we'll pivot and kind of talk about like BPC 157, which I think
That'd be
a lot
great.
of people have heard of. And
Yeah.
check us out on the next episode as we dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, thanks for being here and joining us on Beyond the Pump, where we talk about the business of science and nutrition coaching. Big thanks to, obviously, Dr. Trevor Turner here at Provita Health. So if you guys are ever in Atlanta, make sure you guys stop by, say hello. If they wanted to get in contact with you, if they were to reach out, which channel or what method would you prefer that they do that with?
Emails info@provita.com, websites provita.com, phone number 404-900-7371.
All right, amazing. Anything else you want to plug as we wrap up?
Appreciate your time, Andrew. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Dr. Turner. We'll see you on the next one.